Dust hangs in the Arizona air like memories that refuse to settle. On a forgotten back road where even coyotes fear to tread, 78-year-old Clara Beckett eases her ancient pickup to a stop. Through the wavering heat, she spots a battered Apache man collapsed beside a smoking truck, twin infants wailing in the unforgiving sun. His eyes meet hers, desperation mixed with something deeper. The baby's cries pierce the desert silence. Clara's arthritic hands grip the steering wheel tighter. She hasn't helped anyone in years, not since Robert died. The cartel has marked this man, the same people who've been eyeing her land. But those babies won't survive another hour in this heat. Will Clara risk everything for strangers with nowhere left to run? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Clara Beckett's day began like all the others, with aching joints and the soft whine of her ancient border collie, Scout. The morning sun painted her weathered ranch house in harsh relief, exposing every crack in the adobe and every missing shingle. She'd stopped seeing these imperfections years ago, just as she'd stopped noticing the emptiness of the rooms. Her morning ritual never varied. Coffee brewed strong enough to stand a spoon in, 2 pieces of toast with the store-bought jam she'd reluctantly switched to after her hands became too arthritic for canning, a small box of pills organized by day of the week, and always Robert's cavalry medal placed beside her plate, a silent breakfast companion. "Another day above ground, Robert," she murmured, running her thumb over the tarnished surface. The medal had been awarded to her husband 43 years ago, before the war had claimed him. Not right away his body had come home intact, but something essential had been hollowed out of him in those distant mountains, and the ranch had gradually become his prison rather than his paradise. From her kitchen window, Clara surveyed what remained of the Flying Bee Ranch. Once, 500 head of cattle had grazed the surrounding hills. Now only 27 remained, mostly older cows she couldn't bring herself to sell. The barn leaned precariously to one side. The windmill creaked but still pumped enough water for her modest needs. It was less a working ranch now than a stubborn old woman's stand against time. The letter from the bank lay unopened on the counter where it had sat for 3 days. She knew what it contained, the same thing the bank manager had told her in town last month. The offer from Saguaro Development Group was still open, but not indefinitely. They wanted her 160 acres for a resort complex. The money would be enough to see her through whatever years remained in comfort. Clara scoffed at the thought. Comfort had never been her aim. Grabbing her wide-brimmed hat, she stepped onto the porch. Her old Ford pickup waited in the yard, its blue paint faded to the color of a winter sky. In the distance, dust rose from the county road, another convoy of unmarked vehicles heading north toward the reservation, the 3rd this week. She'd mentioned it to Sheriff Denton in town, but he'd dismissed her concerns with that patronizing smile he reserved for old women. "Probably just more government surveyors, Mrs. Beckett. Nothing for you to worry about." But Clara worried. The reservation had been unusually quiet lately. Miguel, who delivered her groceries from town once a month, had whispered about strangers at the trading post. Men with expensive boots and hard eyes, who asked too many questions about water rights and property boundaries. "We're going to town, Scout," she announced, and the old dog thumped his tail in response. Clara tucked the medal into her pocket, where it had ridden for decades, a talisman against loneliness. The drive to Copper Canyon took 45 minutes on good days. Clara kept the truck at a steady 50, ignoring the occasional vehicle that roared past. Nobody rushed in this part of Arizona, except people who didn't belong. The desert demanded patience. Her route took her past the Gonzalez place, abandoned now after Ernesto's death last winter, and the turnoff to the reservation 20 miles beyond. Clara slowed as she approached the dirt track leading to what locals still called Indian Land, though she knew the Apache people preferred their own names for their home. Movement caught her eyes flicker of reflected light from the hills above the road. She squinted, making out the silhouette of a parked vehicle where no vehicle should be, watching the road, watching her. Clara pressed the accelerator, feeling a familiar prickle at the back of her neck. The same feeling she'd had the night before Robert's unit deployed. The certainty that something irreversible was about to happen. Wicasa Redbird had never intended to run. Running meant admitting defeat, and defeat was something his grandfather had taught him to resist until his final breath. But the twins changed everything. 6 hours earlier, he had been asleep in the small house on the eastern edge of the reservation, his infant son and daughter nestled in the handmade crib beside his bed. The smell of smoke woke him, not wood smoke from a cooking fire, but the acrid stench of gasoline and burning plastic. The living room was already engulfed when he burst through the bedroom door, twins clutched against his chest. Photos of his late wife, Lisa, curled and blackened on the wall as he watched. One image, their wedding day at the tribal community center, seemed to stare back at him through the flames, her smile preserved for a final moment before fire consumed it. There was no time for mourning. He knew who had done this, the same men who had approached him 3 days ago with their offers and thinly veiled threats. The men with gold watches and cartel connections who wanted the forgotten uranium mine beneath his family's ancestral land. "Leave now," their spokesman had said, fingers drumming on the hood of a black SUV. "Or don't leave at all." Wicasa had given them his answer then, a cold stare, and turned back. The Apache didn't surrender their land, not to the Spanish, not to the US/cavalry, and certainly not to cartel thugs playing businessman. Now, as he bundled the crying twins into his truck, he scanned the darkness for watchers. The neighboring houses sat dark and silent. No one would interfere. Fear had worked its poison into the community over the past months. His truck coughed reluctantly to life. Supplies were fewer, half-empty canteen, some formula powder, and clean diapers. His go-bag from his army days contained the essentials: first aid kit, knife, fire starters. And the most precious item of all, his father's journal, containing the hand-drawn maps to the old plesiscrid sites unknown to outsiders where Apache people had hidden during times of persecution. The irony wasn't lost on him. After 2 tours in Afghanistan, Sergeant Wicasa Redbird was now a refugee in his own homeland. He took the back roads, avoiding the main highway where tribal policemen now on cartel payrolls might be watching. The twins, Ayana and Tokala, had mercifully fallen asleep despite the truck's constant rattling. Their round faces, so much like their mothers, glowed copper in the dashboard light. "Stay strong, little warriors," he whispered. "We come from survivors." The truck began to shudder as the eastern horizon brightened to a thin line of gold. Steam hissed from beneath the hood, and the temperature gauge pushed into the red. Wicasa cursed under his breath, easing onto the shoulder of the narrow desert road. He had pushed the old vehicle too hard. 10 more miles, and they would have reached the canyon where his father's cousin lived, a man who still honored the old ways and would have sheltered them. Now they sat exposed on an empty stretch of road with the sun rising mercilessly before them. The twins stirred as the engine died, perhaps sensing the change. Ayana began to whimper, her tiny fists balling against the thin blanket. Tokala soon joined his sister, their cries harmonizing in the still desert air. Wicasa checked his phonino service. The canteen held barely 2 inches of water. He dampened a cloth and gently wiped the twins' foreheads, knowing it wouldn't be enough if help didn't come soon. In the distance, heat shimmered above the asphalt. He blinked, unsure if the approaching dust cloud was real or a desperate mirage. A vehicle was coming, an old pickup truck. Friend or foe, it represented their only chance. Wicasa placed the twins carefully in the scant shade beside the road and stood, swaying slightly from exhaustion, to face whatever came next. Clara slowed the pickup, squinting through the dusty windshield. The figure wavering in the heat mirage looked like a man, though it was hard to tell at this distance. Beside him on the ground, something small moved. Scout whined from the passenger seat, sensing her tension. "Hush now," she murmured, one gnarled hand absently patting the dog's head, while the other gripped the wheel tighter. This far from town, strangers meant trouble, especially these days. She could still turn around. The rational part of her mind urged caution, but the twins' cries carried through her partially opened window, thin and desperate like the bleating of newborn lambs. Clara eased onto the shoulder 50 yards from the broken-down truck, keeping the engine running. The man didn't approach, which she counted as a point in his favor. Instead, he stood protectively near the small bundles on the ground, watching her with wary exhaustion. "You need help?" she called through the window, not yet ready to step outside. The man nodded once. "My truck overheated, we need water." His voice was steady despite his obvious fatigue. Clara assessed him with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent 7 decades learning to read people, young mid-30s perhaps, military bearing in the way he stood. Native, most likely Apache from his features and their proximity to the reservation. The twins at his feet wailed with increasing distress. "Those babies don't sound good," she observed, finally opening her door. Scout stayed in the truck as instructed. "They're dehydrated. Been too long in the heat." The man knelt beside the infants, his broad shoulders curving protectively over them. "I'm Wicasa Redbird. My friends call me Wick." Clara approached slowly, feeling the familiar ache in her hip with each step. Clara Beckett. She offered no hand to shake, instead peering down at the twins. Their small faces were flushed red, little tongues dry in their open mouths. "How old?" "6 months." She nodded, making calculations. "You running from someone, Mr. Redbird?" His eyes met hers directly. "Yes." "The men in the black SUVs." Surprise flickered across his face. "You've seen them?" "3 convoys this week alone." Clara glanced in her rearview mirror. The road remained empty, but dust hung in the distance. "We should move these little ones into some shade." She returned to her truck and emerged with a gallon jug of water and a small cooler. The man watched her cautiously, making no move to approach. "I'm not going to hurt your children," she said gruffly, "but they need fluids and cooling. I've raised enough ranch babies to know heat distress when I see it." Something in her tone must have convinced him. He gathered both twins in his arms and followed her to the shaded side of her pickup. Clara dampened clean handkerchiefs from her pocket and gently laid them on the babies' foreheads. She mixed water with a bit of the sugar packets she kept in the glove compartment. "Small sips," she instructed, showing him how to drip the sweetened water into their parched mouths with her fingertip. "Too much at once will make them sick." As they worked in tense cooperation, Clara took in the details she'd missed at first glance. The man's shirt smelled of smoke, soot still darkened his hands. And the empty canteen at his belt had a military insignia. She recognized instantly the same unit patch that had adorned her husband's uniform. "You served with the 7th Cavalry," she stated, not a question. Wick's hands stilled momentarily. "2 tours, Afghanistan. My husband was 7th Cav, different war, same patch." She met his gaze directly. "Those men after you, they the same ones causing trouble on the reservation?" He nodded, attention returning to the twins as the little girl began to take the water more eagerly. The dust cloud on the horizon grew more distinct. Clara made her decision. "Get your things and these babies into my truck. Whatever's coming, we don't want to be here when it arrives." The rutted driveway to the Flying Bee Ranch rattled Clara's old bones and Wick's nerves in equal measure. The twins, settled in a makeshift nest of blankets on the bench seat between them, had finally stopped crying. The little boy, Tokala, slept with the abandon only infants can manage. His sister Ayana watched the passing landscape with dark, solemn eyes. "Not much to look at," Clara said as the ranch house came into view, "but it's quiet and the water's clean." Wick scanned the property with the practiced gaze of someone accustomed to identifying defensive positions and escape routes. The weathered 2-story adobe structure sat back from the road, a windmill and water tank positioned behind it. To the north, rocky outcroppings provided natural shelter. South and east, open rangeland stretched toward distant mountains. "Nearest neighbor?" he asked. 5 miles that way, Clara pointed west. "Gonzalez Place, but Ernesto died last winter. Nobody there now." She parked beside the porch. "Sheriff's Department patrols the main road maybe once a week. We're off the grid here, more or less." Inside, the house was cool and dimly lit, furnished with heavy wooden pieces that had witnessed decades of life. Clara moved with practiced efficiency, showing Wick to a small bedroom off the kitchen. "Bathroom's through there. I'll fetch the cradle from the attic for these little ones." She hesitated, then added, "My son used it, long time ago." While Clara rummaged upstairs, Wick laid the twins on the bed, surrounding them with pillows. Ayana had finally succumbed to sleep, her tiny hand clutching her brother's sleeve. He allowed himself a moment of relief before the weight of their situation pressed down again. They were safe for now, but for how long? The cartel's reach was extensive, their intelligence network efficient. If they tracked him here, he'd be bringing danger to this old woman who'd shown unexpected kindness. Clara returned with a wooden cradle, its surface smoothed by generations of use. Together they transferred the sleeping twins, Clara demonstrating a surprising gentleness as she tucked a soft blanket around them. "They need formula," Wick said. "I only had enough for one more feeding." "Town's too risky right now," Clara replied, "but I keep powdered milk for emergencies. It'll do until morning." She eyed his smoke-stained clothes. "Bathroom's got hot water if you want to clean up. I'll find some of Robert's things might be a bit short on you, but they'll be clean." The ancient radio on the kitchen counter crackled to life as Clara adjusted the dial. Reception was poor this far out, but the local station's afternoon news broadcast cut through the static. "Authorities are searching for Wikasa Redbird, 34, who is wanted for questioning regarding a suspicious fire on the San Carlos reservation last night. Redbird is believed to be traveling with 2 infant children. Tribal police spokesman James Tallfeather stated that the children may be at risk." Clara's eyes met Wick's across the room. His expression had hardened into a mask. "They're saying I kidnapped my own children," he said flatly, "after they burned my house with us inside it." "Who's they?" Clara asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Men who want my land. They've bought off some tribal police, maybe higher officials too." He looked toward the bedroom where his children slept. "There's a uranium deposit under my family's traditional grounds. Been there for generations, but suddenly it's valuable again." Clara considered this, then reached decisively for the radio's power switch, cutting off the broadcast mid-sentence. "I don't much care for the news these days," she said. "Too many lies dressed up as facts." She moved to a cupboard and withdrew 2 mugs and a bottle of whiskey. "My husband used to say you can tell a lot about a man by how he handles 2 things, exhaustion and strong liquor." She poured 2 fingers in each mug and slid one across the table. "So, Mr. Redbird, before we decide what happens next, why don't you tell me the real story, all of it?" Dawn found Wick on Clara's porch, watching the sun paint the desert in shades of amber and rose. The night had been the first unbroken rest he'd had in days, despite sleeping in a chair beside the cradle. The twins still slumbered inside, their small chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. "Coffee!" Clara appeared beside him, offering a steaming mug. He accepted with a nod of thanks. They stood in companionable silence, 2 strangers bound by circumstance and the shared language of early risers. "Your husband," Wick finally said. "He was 7th Cavalry in Vietnam." Clara nodded. "Robert Beckett, Staff Sergeant, 68 to 70. My father served with a Beckett, used to tell stories about a white man who learned Apache words and respected our ways." Wick studied her face. "Said that man saved his life during the Tet Offensive." A ghost of a smile touched Clara's lips. "That sounds like Robert. He came back with a notebook full of Apache phrases. Used to practice them with Miguel at the trading post." She sipped her coffee. "Your father, he came home?" "Eventually. Not the same man who left." Wick's gaze returned to the horizon. "War does that." "Yes," Clara said simply. "It does." After breakfast, Clara disappeared into the back bedroom that had remained closed since their arrival. She returned carrying a wooden box inlaid with turquoise stones. "Robert's things," she explained, placing it on the kitchen table. "I haven't opened this in years." Inside lay the artifacts of a soldier's life. Medals, patches, dog tags, and photographs yellowed with age. Beneath them, wrapped in a faded bandana, was a leather-bound journal. "He kept this during his 2nd tour," Clara said, running her fingers over the worn cover. "Said writing helped him remember who he was." Wick reached for a photograph showing a group of soldiers, some white, some clearly Native American, standing before a helicopter. "My father is here." He pointed to a young man with the same high cheekbones and steady gaze he saw in the mirror. "And this must be your husband." Clara nodded, throat tight with unexpected emotion. Robert's unit worked closely with Apache scouts. He said they were the best trackers and fighters he'd ever known. She carefully opened the journal, paging through entries written in a steady hand. After he came home, he maintained contact with several of the Apache men. They would visit sometimes, sitting on this very porch, speaking of things they couldn't share with anyone else. She paused at a page containing a hand-drawn map. He mentioned a place once, said if the world ever went sideways, there was a canyon where his Apache brothers would gather. A place outsiders couldn't find. Wick stared at the map, recognition dawning. The hidden canyon. It's part of our oral tradition, a sanctuary during the worst years of the Indian Wars. Most believe it's just a legend. Not to Robert. Clara turned the page to reveal a series of coordinates and landmarks carefully noted. He believed in being prepared. From the bedroom came the sound of one twin stirring, soon joined by the second. Wick rose automatically, but Clara was already moving. "I'll tend to them," she said. "You study that map. If this hidden canyon exists, it might be the safest place for your children." While Clara changed and fed the twins, Wick pored over Robert's journal. The descriptions matched stories his grandfather had told, a narrow canyon accessible only through passages known to tribal elders, with a year-round spring and natural caves for shelter. According to legend, an entire Apache band had survived there for 2 winters, while the army searched fruitlessly. "If we can reach it," he murmured, "we might actually stand a chance." Clara returned with the twins, Ayana cradled in her arms, while Tokala contentedly chewed on his fist. "Well, is it real?" "It's real," Wick confirmed. "About 70 miles northeast, in the most remote part of the reservation. Difficult terrain, no roads." He looked up at her. "Thank you for this. It might save their lives." Robert would have wanted that. Clara's weathered face softened as she gazed down at Ayana. These children deserve a future. "We'll need supplies," Wick began, but stopped at the sound of tires on gravel. Clara moved to the window with surprising speed for her age, peering through the faded gingham curtains. "It's Miguel's truck," she said, shoulders relaxing slightly. "Monthly delivery." Wick swept the journal and map into the wooden box. "He trustworthy?" "Known him 30 years. His family's been in these parts longer than mine." Clara straightened her shirt. "But he doesn't need to know you're here." She met Miguel at the door while Wick retreated to the bedroom with the twins. Through the thin walls, he could hear the easy rhythm of their conversation, Clara's terse questions, Miguel's animated responses. The exchange lasted 15 minutes before the truck's engine started again. Clara entered the bedroom carrying bags of groceries. "Miguel says Sheriff Denton was asking about strangers in town. Mentioned your name specifically." She began unpacking supplies onto the dresser formula, diapers, baby food. Said there's a reward for information. "How much?" 10,000. Clara's expression was grim. "That's cartel money. Sheriff doesn't have that kind of cash." Wick nodded, bouncing Tokala gently as the baby fussed. "Did Miguel seem suspicious?" "Hard to tell. He mentioned seeing a black SUV parked near my turnoff yesterday. She set down a transistor radio, newer than her ancient kitchen model. Brought this so we can keep up with news. Said the reservation's crawling with tribal police and consultants from Phoenix." They spent the afternoon preparing. Clara pulled supplies from various hiding spots around the ranch, ammunition for the lever-action rifle that hung above the fireplace, medical supplies, preserved food. Wick modified the cradle, adding padded sides that would allow the twins to travel safely in the truck bed if necessary. As sunset approached, Clara tuned the new radio to the local station. The news had escalated. Tribal authorities have issued an Amber Alert for 6-month-old twins, Ayana and Tokala Redbird, believed to be in the custody of their father, Wikasa Redbird, a person of interest in an arson investigation. Child Protective Services spokesperson Elaine Murphy expressed concern for the infant's welfare. "CPS," Clara muttered, shutting off the radio with a disgusted click. "Now we're dealing with the government too." "They're building a narrative," Wick said quietly. "Unstable father burns down his home, kidnaps his children, makes it easier to shoot first when they find us." The phone rang, startling them both. Clara rarely received calls. She answered warily, listening more than speaking. Her expression darkened as the conversation progressed. "That was Harriet Barnes," she said after hanging up. "Runs the diner in town. Sheriff's deputy was there for lunch, talking too much as usual. They're organizing a search party for tomorrow volunteers with hunting dogs, planning to start at the reservation border and work their way outward. Dogs will pick up our trail eventually," Wick said. Clara nodded, mind working. "We need to buy time." She moved to the window, staring at the darkening sky. "New moon tonight, good for moving without being seen." "You're thinking of leaving now?" Wick asked. "Not all of us. You and the twins stay put." Clara's voice took on the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to giving orders. "I'll drive north, leave a false trail. Make it look like you're heading for the state line." "Too dangerous," Wick protested. "If they catch you, they'll find a stubborn old woman who got lost driving home." She smiled thinly. "Nobody suspects grandmothers." While Clara gathered supplies for her diversion, Wick paced the small bedroom, twins sleeping peacefully despite the tension surrounding them. The weight of putting Clara at risk gnawed at him. She had already done more than anyone could expect of a stranger. A dog barked in the distance, not Scout's familiar woofing, but the sharp, trained sound of a hunting hound. Clara appeared in the doorway, keys in hand, expression grave. "That's closer than it should be. We've got company coming." The bark came again, closer this time, followed by the distant rumble of vehicle engines. "False trail won't work now," Clara said, already moving toward the kitchen. "We fortify." From beneath a loose floorboard, she extracted a metal boxer, husband's toolbox, containing not just wrenches and screwdrivers but items Wick recognized from his own military days: wire cutters, a compass, waterproof matches, and other survival gear. "Robert believed in preparation," Clara explained, catching Wick's expression. "After Vietnam, he couldn't sleep unless he knew we had options." They worked with urgent efficiency. Wick gathered the twins into a makeshift carrier fashioned from a sturdy canvas bag, allowing him to keep them close while maintaining free hands. Clara moved through the house, closing shutters and securing doors with practiced motions. "The root cellar," she said, leading him to a trapdoor hidden beneath a faded rug, "goes back to when this place was built. Original settlers needed somewhere to hide from Apache raids." She smiled faintly at the irony. "Now it'll hide Apache instead." The cellar was small but dry, with rough-hewn steps leading to a dirt floor. Clara lit a kerosene lamp, revealing shelves of preserved food, jugs of water, and a narrow cot. "I'll prepare this for the twins," she said. "You check the perimeter. Anyone approaching should be visible from the windmill platform." Wick climbed the weathered ladder to the windmill's observation deck, his military training automatically cataloguing defensive positions and escape routes. The property had natural advantages: clear lines of sight in all directions, elevated positions for surveillance, and multiple outbuildings offering concealment and cover. In the distance, headlights bounced along the access road, still a mile out, but approaching steadily. He counted 3 vehicles. From another direction came the hunting dogs, their handlers visible as shadows moving across the open desert. Clara joined him, rifle in hand. "What do you see?" 3 vehicles from the east, search party with dogs from the south. He pointed to a dust cloud barely visible in the fading light, and something else coming from the reservation side. "Motorcycles, maybe." "Coordinated approach," Clara observed grimly. "Someone's taking this seriously." They descended quickly, moving to implement the defensive measures they'd discussed. Clara retrieved solar-powered floodlights from the barn, positioning them to illuminate the yard while keeping the house in relative darkness. Wick uncovered an ancient gas generator behind the workshop, checking its fuel level and connections to the house's wiring. "Won't power much," Clara admitted, "but enough to surprise them if needed." From the toolbox, Wick extracted fishing line and small bells, creating rudimentary alarm systems across likely approach paths. Clara, meanwhile, filled water containers and moved ammunition to accessible locations throughout the house. "The twins?" Wick asked, glancing toward the main building. "Sleeping in the cellar, Scouts with them." Clara handed him a handheld radio from Robert's collection. "These still work, short range but enough for the property." As darkness fell completely, they made final preparations. Clara showed Wick the ranch's hidden features: irrigation channels that could flood portions of the yard, a reinforced storm shelter behind the barn, and a tunnel connecting the root cellar to the workshop, dug during Prohibition to hide bootleg liquor. "This place is a fortress," Wick observed. "Robert had his demons," Clara replied, "but his paranoia might save your children tonight." The distant engines grew louder, then suddenly cut off. The vehicles had stopped just beyond the property line. Wick's hand went instinctively to the knife at his belt, the only weapon he'd managed to bring from his burning home. Clara noticed the gesture. From a cabinet above the refrigerator, she removed a wooden case containing a service pistol military issue, well maintained. "Robert's backup piece," she said, offering it to Wick. "I expect you know how to use it." He checked the weapon with practiced hands. "You sure about this, Clara? These people could be dangerous. This isn't your fight." Clara's weathered face hardened as she lifted her rifle. "They brought it to my land. That makes it my fight." A spotlight suddenly blazed from the direction of the approaching vehicles, sweeping across the front of the property. One of the perimeter bells chimed softly from the southern approach. "They're here," Wick said quietly. The night passed in a tense standoff. The vehicles remained at the perimeter, occasionally sweeping spotlights across the property, but making no move to approach. The dog handlers circled widely, keeping their distance from the ranch buildings. "They're waiting for something," Wick murmured, as false dawn painted the horizon. "Or someone." Clara nodded, massaging her arthritic hands after the long night's vigil. "Probably Sheriff Denton with a warrant. They'll want to make this look legal." As the eastern sky brightened, Wick noticed movement in the scrubland behind the barnote from the direction of their watchers, but from the untamed desert beyond. He tensed, raising the field glasses Clara had provided. 3 figures moved with the terrain, nearly invisible, until they shifted position. Their approach showed intimate knowledge of the land, using natural features for concealment. "We have visitors from the reservation," Wick said quietly. 3 men coming in from the northwest." Clara squinted in that direction. "Friends of yours?" "I sent a message yesterday, but wasn't sure it would reach anyone." Wick's expression remained guarded. "Not everyone on the reservation is willing to stand against the cartel." They watched as the 3 figures slipped expertly past the perimeter, where the vehicles waited, moving like shadows through the desert scrub. Within minutes, they had reached the back of the barn, undetected by the watchers. Clara and Wick met them at the workshop entrance. The men wore modern clothing but moved with an ancestral connection to the land. The eldest, his face deeply lined and hair streaked with grey, stepped forward first. "Nathan Crow-Wing," he introduced himself, extending a hand to Wick. "Your father and I were cousins." The other 2 men were younger-own in his 30s, the other barely out of his teens. "My son Joseph," Nathan indicated the older one, "and my nephew Kemme." Wick clasped each hand in turn. "I didn't know if anyone would come." "The old ways still matter to some of us," Nathan replied. His dark eyes shifted to Clara. "Mrs. Beckett, it has been many years." Clara studied him with surprise. "You knew Robert?" Nathan nodded. "I visited this ranch several times when your husband was alive. He was a good man who respected our traditions." Inside the workshop, Nathan produced a leather pouch from inside his jacket, a traditional medicine bag decorated with intricate beadwork. "For the children," he explained, opening it to reveal dried herbs and small carved fetishes. "My grandmother was a healer. These will protect them on the journey ahead." Joseph and Kame had brought practical supplies as well, additional ammunition, preserved food, and a satellite phone untraceable to the reservation. "The situation is worse than you know," Joseph told them, his voice low and urgent. Tribal Chairman Longbow signed mining rights over to Southwest Resources yesterday, subsidiary of the cartel's development company. They're claiming the fire was set by eco-terrorists opposed to the mining project. "And the twins?" Wick asked. "The story is that you took them during a custody dispute with your in-laws," Kime explained. "They've brought your wife's parents from Oklahoma to make statements to the press." Wick's jaw tightened. "Lisa's parents haven't spoken to us since she married me. They've never even seen the twins." Nathan placed a steadying hand on Wick's shoulder. "This is why we must move quickly. The hidden canyon is real, just as your father taught you. Several families have already gone there. away from the corruption that has infected the tribal council. Clara spread Robert's map on the workbench. Can you confirm these routes? Nathan studied the yellowed paper, nodding slowly. Your husband marked the paths well, but some have changed with time. He took a pencil, making careful adjustments. This pass has eroded, and here, he indicated a ravine, there is a new route that few know about. How soon can we leave? Wick asked. Nathan's gaze shifted to the property's perimeter. Not while they watch, but tonight, he pointed to gathering clouds on the western horizon. A storm comes. It will cover our departure. Clara followed his gaze. That's at least 12 hours away. If the sheriff arrives with a warrant before then we will need a distraction, Nathan said simply. From his pocket, he withdrew a small wooden whistle carved in the shape of an eagle. Fortunately, we came prepared. The sheriff's cruiser appeared just after noon, kicking up a plume of dust as it wound along the access road. 2 additional vehicles followed, a tribal police SUV and an unmarked black sedan that Wick recognized immediately. Cartel, he said from his observation point at the upstairs window. The man in the passenger seat of the black car is the one who threatened me. Clara stood at the bottom of the stairs, rifle propped against the wall but within easy reach. Nathan and the others? Hidden in the root cellar with the twins. Wick descended, adjusting his borrowed shirt. Remember the plan. You haven't seen me. You're just a confused old woman who doesn't appreciate trespassers. Clara snorted. Won't be much acting required for that part. The vehicles parked in a semicircle before the house. Sheriff Denton emerged first, a heavy-set man in his 50s, whose uniform strained against his belly. From the tribal police vehicle came Officer James Tallfeather, thin and nervous-looking. The black sedan remained occupied, its windows tinted, but not enough to hide the silhouettes of 2 men watching the proceedings. Clara stepped onto the porch as they approached, her posture deceptively frail, one hand clutching a sweater around her shoulders despite the heat. "Sheriff," she greeted coldly, "you're trespassing on private property." Denton removed his hat, adopting what he clearly believed was a respectful tone. "Mrs. Beckett, sorry to disturb you, but we're conducting an investigation. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" "I mind very much," Clara replied. "Unless you've got a warrant, this conversation is over." The sheriff's practiced smile tightened. "Now, Clara, there's no need for that. We're looking for a dangerous fugitive man named Wicasa Redbird. Suspected arsonist, kidnapped his own babies. Might have come this way yesterday." "Haven't seen anyone," Clara said flatly. "Now get off my land." Officer Tallfeather stepped forward, holding out a document. "Mrs. Beckett, we have a warrant to search these premises for the missing children. Their grandparents are very concerned." Clara took the paper, studying it with narrowed eyes. 20 years of handling ranch business had taught her to recognize legal sleight of hand. "This authorizes a search for missing children based on an anonymous tip." She looked up sharply. "Who exactly called in this tip, Sheriff?" Denton's face flushed. "That information is confidential, ma'am." "Convenient." She handed the paper back. "This warrant is for the search of a residence where missing children are believed to be present. Says nothing about a fugitive." The sheriff's friendly facade cracked. "Don't play games, Clara. We know Redbird was spotted near your property yesterday. His truck broke down not 10 miles from here. Then why aren't you out there looking for him instead of harassing an old woman?" Clara remained unmoved. "I haven't left this ranch in 3 days. Ask Miguel if you don't believe me." From the black sedan, a door opened. A man in an expensive suit emerged, adjusting his cuffs as he approached. His smile was practiced, his eyes cold as a rattlesnake's. "Mrs. Beckett," he said smoothly, "I'm David Reyes, representing Southwest Resources. We're very concerned about these missing children." "Are you now?" Clara's voice dripped with skepticism. "Funny how a mining company is involved in a missing persons case." Reyes' smile didn't waver. "We're community partners with the reservation. When children are at risk, everyone should help." He nodded to the sheriff. "Perhaps we should conduct our search, officer." "Not so fast," Clara interrupted. "Your warrant has a fundamental flaw." She pointed to the signature line. "Judge Harmon is on vacation in Florida, has been for 2 weeks. His clerk mentioned it when I was in town Monday." She folded her arms. So either he telecommuted that signature or this document is fraudulent. Sheriff Denton's confidence visibly faltered. He exchanged glances with Reyes, whose smile had vanished. "We can clear this up with a phone call," Denton began. "You do that," Clara agreed. "Meanwhile, unless you want to explain to a real judge why you executed a possibly fraudulent warrant, I suggest you remove yourselves from my property." Reyes stepped closer, dropping his voice. "Mrs. Beckett, there are 2 infant children at risk. If you're harboring their father—" "I'm not harboring anyone," Clara cut him off. "But I know a shakedown when I see one. Whatever you're really after, it's not those children." Thunder rumbled in the distance as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Sheriff Denton looked uneasily at the sky, then at Reyes. "We'll be back," Reyes promised quietly, "with proper documentation." "You do that," Clara replied. "I'll be here, always have been." The storm swept in at sunset, bringing welcome darkness and the percussion of rain on the tin roof. The surveillance vehicles retreated to town, unwilling to endure a desert downpour on unpaved roads. Inside the ranch house, Clara lit kerosene lamps that cast warm pools of light against the gathering shadows. Nathan and the other Apache men had fashioned a travel cradle for the twins, using flexible willow branches and soft deerskin. It could be carried like a backpack, leaving the bearer's hands free while keeping the infants secure. "My grandmother made something similar when I was born," Nathan explained, demonstrating how the carrier distributed weight evenly. "Our people have been moving with children through this desert for centuries." While the younger men finalized preparations for their departure, scheduled for the storm's peak around midnight, Clara found Wick on the covered porch, watching lightning spear the distant mountains. "You handled the sheriff well," he said as she joined him. "Most people would have backed down." Clara shrugged. "Bullies are all the same, whether they wear badges or business suits." She settled into the rocking chair that had been Robert's favorite spot. "Besides, he was right about one thing. I'm a confused old woman, just not about what matters." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the rain. From inside came the occasional soft coo of the twins, now awake and being tended by Joseph and Kima, who had taken to the babies with surprising ease. Clara reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded star chart, yellowed with age. Robert used to track the constellations, said it gave him perspective. She spread the paper carefully. "The stars we see tonight are the same ones your ancestors used to navigate this desert, the same ones my grandfather followed to this valley in 1889. Wick studied the chart with interest. "My father taught me to find north using the stars, said it was a skill no technology could replace." "Smart man." Clara traced a constellation with her fingertip. "Robert and I couldn't have children of our own. The doctors never figured out why." Her voice was matter-of-fact, free of self-pity. "We tried to adopt one sea boy from the reservation whose parents had died in a car accident. The tribal council blocked it, said he needed to stay with his people." "I remember that case," Wick said quietly. "Thomas Whitefeather. He was raised by his mother's cousin, became a doctor eventually." Clara nodded. "I know. I followed his progress from a distance, sent anonymous scholarships when he needed them." A faint smile touched her lips. "Robert always said things work out as they should, even when it hurts at the time." Lightning flashed, illuminating the yard. In that brief, stark brightness, Wick caught a glimpse of Clara as she must have been decades earlier, the steel beneath the weathered exterior. "My wife, Lisa, died giving birth to the twins," he found himself saying. "Hemorrhage. The clinic on the reservation wasn't equipped for complications." He swallowed hard. "Her parents blamed me for not taking her to Phoenix for the delivery. They hadn't spoken to her since our wedding traditional Apache ceremony, not church. They didn't approve." "And now they're suddenly concerned, grandparents," Clara observed. "They're being used," Wick said. "Just pieces on the board for Reyes and his people." The door opened behind them as Nathan stepped onto the porch. "It's time to check the trail," he said softly. "The storm will cover our tracks, but we need to move before it passes." Clara rose with the creaking deliberation of age. "I'll get the provisions ready." As Nathan returned inside, Wick touched Clara's arm. "You don't have to come with us. You've done more than enough already. Once we're gone, they'll have no reason to trouble you." Clara's expression hardened. They want my land as much as they want yours, just for different reasons. Water rights, access roads to the reservation. She shook her head. There's no going back to before for either of us. She gazed out at the storm-lashed landscape that had been her home for over 50 years. Besides, those babies need more than just their father's protection. They need a grandmother too stubborn to quit. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, followed immediately by a thunderclap that seemed to affirm her decision. The first warning came from Scout, whose low growl cut through the storm's rumble. Clara and Wick exchanged glances. The old dog rarely sounded false alarms. Nathan appeared in the doorway, expression grim. Vehicles approaching from the south, not using headlights. Wick moved to the window, peering through a narrow gap in the curtains. 3 SUVs, moving slow, using the storm for cover. He turned to Clara. These aren't law enforcement. Sheriff would announce himself, especially in this weather. Cartel, Clara said flatly. It wasn't a question. Events unfolded with military precision. Clara ushered the twins and the younger Apache men into the root cellar, while Wick and Nathan took defensive positions. Years of Robert's paranoid preparations were about to prove their worth. The attackers struck from multiple directions, simultaneous 4 men approaching the barn, 2 more heading for the back entrance, while a third pair circled toward the front porch. Their movements betrayed professional training, coordinated through hand signals and radio earpieces, visible when lightning flashed. From his position in the darkened kitchen, Wick watched the men advance through the scope of Robert's hunting rifle. They wore tactical gear and moved with the confidence of those accustomed to overwhelming their targets. "They're not expecting resistance," he whispered to Nathan. "They think it's just an old woman alone." A shotgun blast shattered the night as Clara fired at the barn from an upstairs window, not aiming to hit, but to announce that the house was defended. The attackers dove for cover, momentarily confused by the unexpected resistance. The next minutes blurred into chaos. Wick triggered the perimeter lights Clara had installed, flooding the yard with sudden, blinding illumination. The attackers, caught in the open, fired wildly at the house. Glass shattered and wood splintered as bullets struck the building. Nathan used the tribal whistle, its high-pitched tone carrying even through the storm. From the surrounding darkness came answering calls, the prearranged signal to Joseph and Kame that danger had found them. Clara proved herself a marksman, picking her shots with calm precision despite the violence erupting around her. 20 years of keeping coyotes from my chickens, she explained when Wick cast her a surprised glance between shots. One attacker went down, clutching his leg where Clara's bullet had found him. Another cried out as Nathan's shot struck his shoulder. The remaining men fell back, retreating to their vehicles. A moment of tense silence followed, broken only by the storm and the moans of the wounded men. Then a new sound emerged, the deep, throaty rumble of multiple motorcycles approaching from the east. "Reinforcements," Wick said grimly, checking his ammunition. But when lightning illuminated the new arrivals, Wick recognized Apache faces beneath the rain-slicked helmets, 6 riders, all armed, their bikes modified for silent running. "The resistance," Nathan explained, a hint of pride in his voice. "Not everyone on the reservation has surrendered to corruption." The cartel men, seeing themselves suddenly outnumbered, retreated fully to their vehicles. One attacker remained behind, unable to walk with his wounded leg. As the SUVs peeled away, their headlights finally activated in their haste to escape, he dragged himself toward the shelter of a juniper tree. Clara approached the wounded man cautiously, rifle ready. He was young, barely 20, with the distinctive tattoos of cartel foot soldiers visible on his neck. "Who sent you?" she demanded. The man spat on the ground. "You're dead anyway, old woman. Reyes doesn't leave witnesses." Nathan knelt beside him, examining the wound with clinical detachment. "He'll live." Bullet passed clean through. From the man's jacket pocket, a shell casing fell to the ground, distinctive brass with markings Clara didn't recognize. Nathan did, however, his expression darkening as he picked it up. "Military grade," he said quietly to Wick. "From Mexican Army supplies. This confirms who we're dealing with." The Apache motorcyclists secured the prisoner, while Clara and Wick retreated to the house to check for damage. Bullet holes peppered the front, and 2 windows were shattered, but the thick adobe walls had protected those inside. "We need to leave now," Wick said, helping Clara gather the emergency packs. "They'll be back with more men." Clara nodded, casting one last look around the home she'd maintained for over 50 years. "I never thought I'd be forced out like this." "We'll come back," Wick promised, though they both recognized the hollow ring of his words. The storm continued to rage outside, providing the cover they desperately needed for their escape. The motorcyclists took the wounded cartel member away, heading toward the reservation where sympathetic tribal elders would decide his fate. Inside the ranch house, preparations accelerated with the efficiency of people who understood that minutes could mean survival. Clara moved through the rooms with purpose, selecting only essentials: medications, first aid supplies, water purification tablets. Her hands lingered briefly on framed photographs, then moved past them. Memories couldn't protect the twins. In the kitchen, she unlocked a metal firebox hidden behind a loose baseboard. Inside lay documents accumulated over a lifetime: deed to the ranch, insurance policies, birth certificates. She added Robert's military papers and his journal with the canyon coordinates. "For the road ahead," she explained to Wick, who entered carrying the twins' supplies. "Legal proof might matter as much as bullets before this is over." Nathan spread a hand-drawn map across the tableau Roberts, but his own, created from generations of oral knowledge, passed down through his family. "We'll take 3 vehicles," he explained, tracing routes with a weathered finger. "The motorcycles will lead, checking for roadblocks. Joseph and Kame will drive the second vehicle with most of our supplies." He indicated a winding path that avoided main roads. "You, Clara, and the twins will take her truck on this route, longer but less likely to be watched." Wick studied the map, committing it to memory. "Rendezvous point?" "Here," Nathan pointed to a formation marked with an X. "Eagle Rock, sacred ground where even corrupt tribal police won't follow easily." He folded the map carefully. "From there, we enter the old territories where vehicles can't go. The journey to the hidden canyon continues on foot." Clara entered with a small leather satchel containing the twins' necessities. "They're fed and changed, should sleep through the first leg of the journey." Joseph appeared in the doorway, rain dripping from his jacket. "Vehicles are loaded. No sign of the sheriff or the cartel men returning yet, but the storm is passing quickly." Clara nodded and moved to the back porch where Scout waited. She knelt with difficulty, wrapping her arms around the old dog's neck. "You're staying with Miguel," she told him, voice gentle but firm. "He'll care for you until I return." "If I return," her eyes said, though her words remained optimistic. Joseph would drop Scout at Miguel's place on the way. The old ranch hand was one of the few people Clara trusted completely. The dog would be safe there, and Clara couldn't bear to bring him into the dangers that lay ahead. In the bedroom, Clara changed into practical clothes: sturdy jeans, flannel shirt, hiking boots worn to a perfect fit over decades of desert walking. From the closet shelf, she retrieved a wide-brimmed hat with a beaded banda gift from an Apache craftsman to Robert years ago. The last item she collected was small enough to fit in her Palmer compass that had belonged to her grandfather, its aged brass case engraved with pioneer motifs of mountains and stars. It had guided her family to this land generations ago. Now it would guide them away. Wick found her there, standing in the center of the bedroom, compass in hand. "Having second thoughts?" he asked quietly. "No," she replied without hesitation. "Just saying goodbye." She slipped the compass into her pocket. "This house has seen births and deaths, arguments and reconciliations. 52 years of my life within these walls. We'll protect it in your absence," said a voice from the doorway. A tall Apache man Clara didn't recognize stood there, accompanied by Keme. "I'm Daniel Blackhorse. My grandfather was friends with your husband. Our people will watch over your land," Keme explained. "Rotating shifts, always someone present. The cartel won't claim it while you're gone." Clara nodded her thanks, unexpectedly moved by this gesture of respect. Outside, the vehicles waited, engines running. The twins were already secured in Clara's truck, the custom carrier anchored firmly to the seat. Nathan had performed a traditional blessing over them, touching their foreheads with a mixture of sacred herbs and speaking words in Apache that sounded ancient as the desert itself. Clara stood on the porch one final time, looking over the ranch that had defined her existence for so long. The storm had passed, leaving the desert washed clean, stars emerging in the clearing sky. "Ready?" Wick asked, standing beside her. Clara turned from the view, her expression resolute. "Let's go find your hidden canyon." They departed in staggered intervals, headlights extinguished until absolutely necessary. Clara's truck went first, Wick at the wheel while she cradled her grandfather's compass, occasionally confirming their heading despite the darkness. The twins slept soundly in their carrier, lulled by the vehicle's gentle rocking. Two motorcyclists led the way, their modified bikes nearly silent as they scouted the route ahead. Joseph and Kame would follow in Nathan's truck once enough time had passed to ensure the first group wasn't being tracked. The initial roads were familiar to Clara dirt tracks used by ranchers and rarely patrolled. But as they pushed farther into the desert, Wick followed paths invisible to untrained eyes, guided by Nathan's map and Clara's occasional murmured directions. "My husband and I explored every inch of this backcountry," she explained, indicating a turn toward what appeared to be an impassable wash. "The old cattle trails follow ancient paths, Apache paths." Wick navigated the dry creek bed with careful precision. "My grandfather spoke of these routes, called them the ghost roads, visible only to those who know how to read the land." The truck climbed a rocky incline, suspension groaning in protest. At the crest, they paused briefly, killing the engine to preserve fuel and listen for pursuers. The desert spread before them, silvered by starlight, the storm now just a distant flicker on the horizon behind them. "We're officially off any marked map," Clara observed, consulting the compass again. "Another hour to Eagle Rock if the wash isn't flooded from the storm." Dawn found them at the designated rendezvous point, a towering formation of red sandstone shaped vaguely like a raptor in flight. They concealed the truck in a narrow canyon, covering it with the camouflage netting Nathan had provided. The twins woke hungry but remarkably content given the circumstances. Clara prepared formula while Wick changed them, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate task. "You're good with them," Clara noted, testing the formula's temperature on her wrist, just as she'd seen countless mothers do. "Had to be," Wick replied simply. "After Lisa died, it was just us." He lifted Ayana, who gurgled happily at his familiar touch. "They're resilient, like their mother was." The motorcyclists arrived as Clara was feeding Tokala, his tiny hands batting at the bottle. They reported no signs of pursuit, but urged caution. The cartel had connections throughout the region and eyes everywhere. By mid-morning, the sun had transformed the landscape into a shimmering inferno. They sheltered in the shadow of Eagle Rock, conserving energy and water while waiting for the second vehicle. "Something's wrong," Wick said finally, checking his watch. "They should have been here by now." One of the scouts volunteered to backtrack, his motorcycle ideal for navigating the difficult terrain quickly. He returned within the hour, expression grim beneath his helmet. "Roadblock on the county line," he reported. "Sheriff's Department and tribal police. They're checking every vehicle." Clara's eyes narrowed. They couldn't have organized that so quickly without advance planning. "They were expecting us to run," Wick agreed. "Question is, do they know which direction we took?" The answer came with the distant thrum of helicopter rotors, still miles away but approaching steadily. One of the scouts handed Wick a pair of binoculars. The aircraft's profile was civilian, but its systematic search pattern suggested law enforcement methodology. "We need to move," Nathan's voice came from behind them, startling the group. He had approached on foot, materializing from the desert like a spirit. Joseph and Kame abandoned the vehicle and continued cross-country. "They'll rejoin us at the next waypoint." Wick studied the helicopter's trajectory. "They're searching the main routes first, following logical escape paths." Nathan nodded, "Which is why we must take illogical ones." From his pack, he produced an ancient compass, its brass case engraved with symbols Clara didn't recognize. "This was my great-grandfather's. The white man's instruments point to magnetic north, ours points to what matters." Clara compared it with her own compass. The needles aligned differently, with Nathan's pointing slightly eastward of true north. "It guides us to water," Nathan explained, seeing her puzzled expression. "In the desert, Water is life. The hidden paths follow ancient springs and seeps known only to the people who lived here for thousands of years. The helicopter's sound grew louder. Soon they would be within visual range. "Time to disappear," Nathan said, shouldering his pack. He touched the twins gently, murmuring a soft blessing in Apache. "The old ways will protect us now." Leaving the vehicles concealed, they set out on foot, following a path only Nathan could see, one that had existed long before maps and borders, roads and ranches. They traveled through the day's brutal heat, resting in whatever shade the sparse landscape offered. Clara kept pace without complaint, though Wick noticed her occasional wince when her arthritic hip troubled her. The twins remained remarkably calm, as if sensing the necessity of their quiet. By late afternoon, they reached a hidden spring little more than a seep in the rocks, but the water was cool and clean. Nathan filled their canteens, while the motorcyclists maintained watch from elevated positions. 2 hours to the next waypoint, Nathan informed them as they prepared to move again. "Joseph and Keme should meet us there." A sharp whistle from one of the scouts drew their attention. He signaled from his vantage point, pointing southeast. Through binoculars, Wick spotted a dust cloud vehicles moving fast across the desert floor, heading directly toward their position. "They shouldn't know this route," Nathan said, frowning. "These paths aren't on any map." Clara's expression darkened. Someone talked. "Miguel," Wick suggested, remembering the ranch hand who had taken in Scout. Clara shook her head firmly. "Never. He's been loyal for 30 years. She considered for a moment. "But he delivers supplies to other ranches." "If the sheriff pressured him, or the tribal police who took our prisoner," Nathan added grimly. "Not all our people resist the cartel's influence." Regardless of the source, the betrayal's consequence was clear. They needed to move immediately. The group quickly gathered their supplies, the twins secured once more in their carrier on Wick's back. The scouts took separate routes to confuse pursuers, while Nathan led Clara and Wick deeper into the maze of canyons. The terrain grew increasingly difficult, narrow passages between towering sandstone walls, loose scree that shifted treacherously underfoot, dry waterfalls that required careful climbing. Clara struggled with one particularly steep ascent. Wick, despite carrying the twins, reached back to offer his free hand. "I don't need coddling," she said, but accepted his help nonetheless. "It's not weakness to rely on others," Wick replied quietly. "My grandfather taught me that." "Smart man," Clara grunted as she cleared the ledge. "Took me 70 years to learn it." They pushed on as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. The vehicle's dust cloud had disappeared from view, but whether that meant they had lost their pursuers or simply that the terrain now obscured them was impossible to know. The first sign of the approaching sandstorm was subtly a change in air pressure that made their ears pop, followed by an unnatural stillness. Birds ceased their calls, and even insects fell silent. Nathan paused, studying the western horizon with concern. "Haboob," he said, using the Arabic term that had become common in the southwest for the most severe sandstorms. "Moving fast." Clara had experienced enough desert storms to understand the danger. These massive walls of sand could reduce visibility to 0 in seconds, suffocate the unprepared, and completely rewrite the landscape. "How long?" she asked. 20 minutes, maybe less." Nathan scanned the terrain. "We need shelter." They found it in a shallow cave, little more than an overhang in the canyon wall, but enough to shield them from the worst of the storm. As they settled in, Wick carefully removed the twins from their carrier, checking them for any signs of distress from the journey. "What about Joseph and Keem?" Clara asked. "And the scouts?" "They know the protocol," Nathan replied, though worry creased his face. "Find shelter, wait it out, regroup at the next waypoint." The storm arrived with frightening speed, a roaring wall of sand that obliterated the world beyond their shelter. The air filled with fine dust despite their protected position, forcing them to cover their mouths and noses with damp cloths. The twins, sensing the danger, began to cry. Clara took Ayana from Wick, cradling the infant against her chest and humming a soft, tuneless melody that somehow penetrated the storm's roar. Gradually, the baby quieted, tiny fingers clutching Clara's shirt. Through the howling wind came another sound, engines laboring, men shouting. Their pursuers had been caught in the open when the storm hit. Sheriff's men, Clara wondered. Wick shook his head. Cartel, listen to the Spanish. The voices grew closer, disoriented men stumbling through the blinding sand. A beam of light swept past their hiding place, catching Clara's face for a brief, terrifying moment before moving on. They can't see in this any better than we can, Nathan whispered, but if they find this shelter... Wick handed Tokala to Clara and reached for his knife. Nathan produced a small revolver from his ankle holster. The footsteps came closer, flashlight beams dancing erratically through the swirling sand. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the lights moved away, voices fading as the men sought shelter elsewhere. The storm's fury increased, isolating them in a world reduced to their small sanctuary and the screaming wind beyond. When this passes, Wick said, watching the twins now sleeping against Clara's chest, everything will have changed, all tracks erased. A second chance, Nathan agreed, if we survive. Dawn revealed a transformed landscape. The sandstorm had redrawn the desert overnight, erasing trails and reshaping dunes. They emerged from their shelter cautiously, eyes stinging from residual dust despite their precautions. Which way now? Clara asked, bouncing Tokala gently as he fussed. The infant sister remained asleep in Wick's arms, exhausted from the ordeal. Nathan consulted his special compass, then studied the sun's position. For several minutes, he stood motionless, communing with the desert in a way neither Clara nor Wick fully understood. Finally, he pointed to a distant ridgeline. There, the approach to the hidden canyon lies beyond that rise. They set out across the altered terrain, stepping carefully over newly formed sand ripples. The storm had obliterated all signs of their pursuers, but whether that meant safety or simply uncertainty remained to be seen. By mid-morning, heat once again became their primary adversary. Clara's pace slowed, though she rejected Wick's offers to rest. "Time enough for resting when the twins are safe," she insisted, wiping sweat from her brow with a bandana. A whistle high and melodic stopped them in their tracks. Nathan replied with a similar call, and moments later, Joseph emerged from behind a boulder, looking haggard but unharmed. "The storm separated us from Keem," he reported. "I lost sight of him when visibility dropped." Nathan's face remained impassive, but his eyes revealed his concern. "The scouts?" "No sign," Joseph replied, "but I found something else." He led them to a shallow depression shielded by rock outcroppings. There, carefully arranged, lay 3 filled canteens and a small package of dried meat. Apache trail markers nearby. "Our people have been watching over this route." "The resistance," Wick murmured. "They're helping guide us in." Clara examined the offerings with surprise. "I thought the hidden canyon was a secret even among your people." "From most, yes," Nathan confirmed, "but some elders maintain the old knowledge. They would recognize our journey for what it is." Refreshed by the unexpected provisions, they continued toward the ridgeline. The twins grew increasingly fussy in the heat, despite their best efforts to keep them comfortable. Ayana developed a slight fever, causing Wick's worry to deepen with each passing hour. "She needs proper care," he said, touching her flushed cheek. "Soon," Nathan promised. "The canyon has a permanent spring. The water has healing properties according to our traditions." They reached the base of the ridge by late afternoon. What had appeared to be a straightforward ascent from a distance revealed itself as a treacherous maze of loose rock and narrow ledges. Clara stared up at the imposing barrier, doubt flickering across her weathered face for the first time. "I'll slow you down on that climb," she admitted reluctantly. "We go together or not at all," Wick said firmly. "The twins need both of us now." The climb proved as difficult as it appeared. They moved with agonizing slowness, testing each handhold before trusting their weight to it. Joseph led, with Nathan bringing up the rear. Clara pressed on through obvious pain, her determination a palpable force. Near the summit, disaster nearly struck when a rock gave way beneath Clara's foot. She slid several feet before managing to arrest her fall, gasping as sharp stone edges cut into her palms. Wick, who had climbed slightly ahead with Ayana secured to his chest, turned back in alarm. "Clara!" "I'm fine," she insisted, though blood seeped between her fingers. "Keep going." At the ridge's peak, they paused to catch their breath. The view stretched for miles in all directions, vast emptiness that would reveal any approaching threat. But it was what lay on the other side that drew their collective gaze. Below them, concealed from the outside world by the ridge's natural barrier, stretched a verdant cañona, hidden oasis in the desert's harshest sector. A slender ribbon of water caught the late afternoon light, winding through groves of cottonwood and willow. Small structures were visible among the trees, their designs blending with the natural surroundings. "The hidden canyon," Nathan said softly, "untouched by outside forces for generations." Joseph produced a small wooden whistle carved in the shape of an eagle twin to the one Nathan carried. He blew 3 distinct notes, the sound carrying clearly in the still air. After a moment, an answering call rose from the canyon. "They welcome us," Nathan explained. As they began their descent toward the sanctuary, Wick noticed something unusual about the water flowing through the canyon. It seemed to glow with an inner light, as if the setting sun had infused it with its essence. "The sacred spring," Nathan confirmed, following his gaze. "Its waters have sustained our people through our darkest times." Clara watched as Wick's face transformed with hope. "Will it help Ayanna?" "It already has," Nathan replied, nodding toward the infant. The flush was fading from her cheeks, her breathing growing more regular with each step they took toward the canyon floor. "The healing has begun." The hidden canyon's residents welcomed them with quiet efficiency. Women took the twins to be bathed in the sacred spring, while others tended to Clara's injured hands. Approximately 30 people had gathered in this sanctuary, mostly Apache families with young children, plus a few elders whose lined faces spoke of decades spent preserving traditions. Wick reunited with Keem, who had arrived hours earlier guided by one of the motorcyclists. The scouts had also found their way to the canyon, completing their group once more. As night fell, they gathered around a small fire, carefully shielded to prevent any light from being visible beyond the canyon walls. The elders shared news that chilled their momentary sense of security. "The cartel has offered $100,000 for information leading to Wicasa and the children," a white-haired woman named Sarah White Dove informed them. "They're claiming it's to rescue the twins from kidnapping." "And my land?" Clara asked. "Sheriff Denton has filed emergency eminent domain papers," Sarah replied, "claiming a public safety risk due to your harboring a fugitive." Clara's expression hardened. "They're moving fast." "Because they're desperate," Nathan observed. "The mining permits require clear title to both properties. Delays cost them millions." Their discussion continued until dawn approached, weighing options that grew increasingly limited. The hidden canyon offered temporary sanctuary, but Wick and Clara both understood that running forever was no life for the twins. As they debated next steps, a young lookout scrambled down from his perch on the canyon rim, breathless with alarm. "Vehicles approaching from the south," he reported. "Sheriff's cruisers and black SUVs, at least 8 vehicles total." Nathan frowned. "How did they find this place?" "Satellite imagery," Clara suggested. "Military-grade surveillance. Reyes has those connections." They moved quickly to defensive positions. Children and elders retreated to caves deeper in the canyon, while those able to fight took up strategic locations along the rim and approach. Clara insisted on remaining despite her age and injured hands. "This is my fight too," she reminded Wick when he suggested she seek shelter with the twins. The confrontation began with a bullhorn echoing across the canyon. Sheriff Denton's voice, strained with false authority, demanded their surrender. "Wicasa Redbird, we have warrants for your arrest on charges of arson, kidnapping, and assault on law enforcement officers. Send out the children and Mrs. Beckett, and we can resolve this peacefully." Beside the sheriff stood Reyes and a group of hard-faced men in tactical gear, private military contractors rather than regular cartel soldiers. More concerning was the presence of a woman in a business suit carrying a Child Protective Services badge, accompanied by an elderly couple Wick recognized with shock. "Lisa's parents," he murmured to Clara. "They're actually going through with this charade." Clara surveyed the gathering force with a strategist's eye. "They're keeping it official, using legal cover for what's essentially a paramilitary operation." She nodded toward tribal police vehicles at the perimeter. "Notice who's missing." "Chairman Longbow," Wick realized. He's not willing to be seen taking the canyon by force. Nathan approached, expression grim. We're outnumbered and outgunned if they rush the canyon. They won't, Clara said with sudden certainty. Not if we change the rules. From her pocket, she withdrew the ranch deed and other papers she'd brought from her home. I need something to write with. While Denton continued his amplified demands, Clara worked quickly, filling out forms she'd brought with remarkable foresight. When finished, she handed them to Nathan. Get these to Joseph. Tell him to approach from the eastern ridge. They're not watching that side as carefully. He needs to reach my lawyer in town. Nathan studied the documents, eyes widening in understanding. You're sure about this? Clara nodded firmly. More sure than I've been about anything in decades. Joseph departed silently, using ancient Apache paths invisible to untrained eyes. Meanwhile, Clara stepped forward to the canyon's edge, fully visible to those below. Sheriff Denton, she called, her voice carrying surprisingly well. I'd like to discuss terms. The standoff continued for hours, with Clara orchestrating a delaying action through increasingly complex legal arguments that kept Denton and Reyes engaged while Joseph completed his mission. The twins remained safely hidden, though their absence clearly frustrated the CPS representative. By mid-afternoon, a new vehicle approached a government SUV with federal markings. From it emerged a woman in a suit and two men who immediately took command of the scene, pulling Denton aside for a tense conversation. FBI, Nathan murmured, using binoculars to observe, and by a Bureau of Indian Affairs. Clara allowed herself a thin smile. Right on time. Reyes noticed the shift in power immediately, attempting to retreat to his vehicle, only to find his path blocked by federal agents. His face contorted with rage as he glanced up at Clara, finally understanding what she had done. What exactly did you put in those papers? Wick asked quietly. Clara watched as handcuffs were placed on a protesting Sheriff Denton. I signed over my ranch to the Apache Nation Land Trust, she said simply, with certain conditions. 2 weeks later, Clara sat on the porch of the Tribal Healing Center, watching the sunset paint the canyon walls in shades of amber and gold. Her hands, wrapped in medicinal herbs by the community healer, had begun to mend much like everything else around her. The federal investigation had moved with surprising efficiency. Sheriff Denton faced charges of corruption and abuse of power. Reyes and 3 tribal officials had been indicted for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted land seizure. The cartel's mining operation had been permanently halted. Most satisfying to Clara was the discovery that her lawyer had kept copies of Robert's military records, including documentation of uranium contamination from the old mining sites. The evidence had triggered an EPA investigation that would prevent any future exploitation of the reservation lands. Wick emerged from the healing center, twins balanced expertly in his arms. Ayana and Tokala had thrived in the canyon, their round faces brightened by health and security. The council's decision came through, he said, settling beside Clara on the bench. They've granted you permanent resident status. Clara nodded, unsurprised but moved nonetheless. And my conditions? Accepted unanimously. The Flying Bee Ranch lands will be incorporated into the expanded tribal territory, with water rights secured for both properties. Wick adjusted Tokala as the baby reached curiously for Clara. The council was particularly impressed by your requirement that the land never be developed or sold. It's what Robert would have wanted, Clara said simply. That land has its own spirit. It deserves protection. In the center of the canyon community, preparations continued for the evening ceremony. The elders had declared a celebration to formally welcome Clara and recognize the twins' place in the tribe. Traditional drums and voices would soon fill the night air. Sarah White Dove approached, carrying a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. It's finished, she announced, presenting it to Clara. Clara carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a handcrafted cradle smaller than the one from her ranch, but similar in design, with Apache symbols carved into the wooden frame and soft rabbit fur lining the interior. For the little ones, Sarah explained, made in our tradition but incorporating elements of your family's cradle as well. 2 cultures, 1 future. Clara ran her fingers over the intricate carvings, throat tight with emotion. It's beautiful, she managed. Your husband's spirit helped guide this journey, Sarah said gently. The elders sense his presence in how events unfolded. He would be proud of the sanctuary you've helped secure for these children. As the elderly woman departed, Wick carefully transferred the twins to the new cradle. They settled immediately, as if recognizing they were exactly where they belonged. I've been offered a position, Wick said after a comfortable silence. Head of security for the tribal lands. They want to establish a ranger program to protect the boundaries, particularly around the hidden canyon. You'll accept? Yes. His gaze lingered on his children. It means we can stay, build something permanent. The twins will grow up, knowing both their heritage and their future. Clara nodded approvingly. Every child deserves roots and wings. She glanced toward the gathering community members. What about Lisa's parents? They've returned to Oklahoma, Wick replied. The FBI made it clear they were being used as pawns. I've offered to send pictures of the twins, maybe someday. He left the thought unfinished, but Clara understood. Healing came in its own time, like the desert after rain. As darkness fell, Nathan approached with a ceremonial blanket, draping it gently around Clara's shoulders. It's time, he said. The tribe wishes to honor you. Clara rose stiffly, her hip still troubling her despite the healer's treatments. Age had its limitations. But as Wick gathered the twins, and the three of them walked toward the circle of firelight where the community waited, she felt a profound sense of rightness. What had begun as a chance encounter on a lonely desert road had transformed into something neither she nor Wick could have imagined. A new family forged through adversity, a new beginning built on ancient foundations. Under the vast canopy of stars, with the twins nestled safely in their new cradle, Clara joined the circle. The eldest tribal member stepped forward, placing his weathered hands on her shoulders in blessing. Many winters have passed since outsiders were welcomed as true family, he announced to the gathered community. Tonight, we recognize a woman whose courage and wisdom have earned her a place among us. As the drums began and voices rose in songs older than memory, Clara caught Wick's eye across the circle. No words were needed. They had found not just safety, but home for themselves and for the twins who had brought them together. In the flickering firelight, the new cradle gleamed with promise.